Welcome everyone. You've been very patient with us, and this is the last panel before lunch, so we'll try to keep it snappy, but it is also a very chunky topic. China's clean technology boom. We're going to be diving into tensions between competitiveness, de-risking, decarbonisation agendas, and hopefully also providing some concrete suggestions for how to navigate the thorny politics of the current moment. But before that, I'm just going to briefly set the scene. China accounts for 60% of global zero-carbon technology manufacturing, with the majority of solar and battery supply chains managed by Chinese companies and growing market shares in wind and heat pump sectors. And we're also undeniably now in a season of new tit-for-tats around China's clean tech exports. The Biden government kicked this off in May with announcements ramping up tariffs on Chinese EVs, steel, batteries, and solar cells, amongst other commodities. Just 2 weeks ago, the EU announced that it will impose countervailing duties on imports of Chinese EVs starting in July. And we're seeing this kind of unleash a bit of a ripple effect amongst trade partners. Just yesterday, Canada announced that it has plans to also safeguard the Canadian market from surging imports of Chinese-made EVs. These moves are happening for a number of different reasons. One is definitely that trade partners are seeking to capture growing clean tech markets, so looking to boost domestic manufacturing, capture manufacturing jobs, and in that way also shore up political support for the green transition domestically. Moving from economic security to more national security risks under the banner of de-risking, trade partners are also intent on reducing critical dependencies on China in clean tech supply chains. And there's also a clear sense that China has not been playing by the rules, that Chinese overcapacity and subsequent dumping on the global market is threatening the green transition elsewhere. At the same time, all of these governments are governments that have made bold commitments to decarbonize their economies and get to net zero in a short period of time. And on the face of it, you would say a flood of cheap Chinese clean tech exports should be a welcome boost to those climate targets and in meeting those commitments. But, and this is an argument that we're hearing a lot these days, there's a sense that a green transition predicated on cheap Chinese clean tech imports is not politically sustainable. And so we go around in circles. What role should China play in Europe's, the UK's, and the US's decarbonisation agenda? What share of Chinese imports is acceptable from a political resilience or security perspective? What share is necessary if we're going to meet our climate goals? How might trade barriers slow down the transition or increase the costs? And who's actually going to foot the bill of that? So we've assembled a great set of panelists, including also online, to unpack some of these questions. And I'll go over to the panel now. We're going to start with Dr. Michal Meidan, who's the head of China Energy Research at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Before joining OIES, she headed cross-commodity China research at Energy Aspects. And as a key China watcher and commentator, she's going to kick off the discussion by talking us through the latest around Chinese clean energy investment trends. So there's lots of questions circling at the moment. One of these is around whether China's clean technology boom is likely to endure, to what extent we're seeing a kind of structural shift in the Chinese economy from more carbon-intensive sectors to these green sectors as the main drivers of growth. So it would be great to hear from you in terms of what you guys are observing and some of the global implications of that.
Thank you, Johanna. It's great to be here. Is this working?
Maybe hold it closer.
Closer? Okay, closer. Thank you. It's great to be here in this fantastic setting. Lots of questions. I think to start off the discussion, the short answer is yes, clean technology will continue in China, in large part because it's an economic necessity. It is offsetting a lot of the slowdown from the real estate sector. So while it's nice to say that China's transitioning to green tech, it is manufacturing, after all. So there's still a lot of equipment that's being made in China, and that's still energy intensive. It's not real estate sector, but it's still manufacturing. But I think the other thing we have to bear in mind is that China is a manufacturing powerhouse. It is good at making things, and it's not just because of state subsidies. There are many years of state support in lots of different ways that maybe the West can learn from some of those support mechanisms, but there's also a lot of innovation. There's a lot of agility that happens in the corporate space. There are manufacturing hubs and the co-location of industries that has supported China's rise to where it is today, and we can't overlook that. Now, despite all of that, there is still a lot of capacity, excess capacity or overcapacity in China that needs to find a home elsewhere. And it's going, and you've just talked about some of the trade restrictions, it's going to developing economies and to emerging economies. the Chinese companies need that, right? They make much better margins when they export. Chinese EVs sell for almost double in the European market than it does at home. And we're seeing that Chinese companies are also facing the challenges from the overcapacity domestically, and solar companies are even asking the state for support. But they need to go out. Is it a solution or is it a problem? I think it's too easy to say cheap Chinese goods are a solution. I mean, certainly they can help the energy transition because having the equipment is a good start. Having the equipment alone is not enough, right? We need the infrastructure. We need the system design. That is still incumbent on governments to have those things in place. That's not just sort of, again, the cheap goods that will go all the way. But equally, it's not necessarily the core of the problem because, as you said in the introduction, having that equipment is a good start. And I think countries need to have very clear priorities. What is that we want to achieve? Do we want to achieve an energy transition enabled by low-cost goods? Do we want to de-risk from China? And if we want to de-risk from China, then why? What are we worried about? Is there a cybersecurity issue embedded in some of those clean technologies? Some of them there are, but we need to understand more, and we need to know exactly what those cybersecurity risks are. Why are we de-risking from China? Now, there are obviously merits to maintaining industrial competitiveness because every country needs its industries, but let's be honest about what the priorities are and what the trade-offs are in that process. Just saying that China is the bogeyman is just not good enough, I think, in this discussion.
Thank you, Michal. Really helpful to talk about, what are the objectives and also be a bit more granular about where do we face what risks and thinking that through. So back also to the start of the day where we were saying data underpinning the kind of politics of this. I'm going to pass over to Sam. Sam Lowe is a partner at Flint Global. He advises clients on UK and EU trade policy with a particular focus on regulatory barriers to trade, customs, trade and services, and Brexit. Prior to joining Flint, Sam was a senior research fellow at the Centre for European Reform. He's an influential public commentator on all things trade-related. And Sam is going to talk us through the latest trade barriers imposed by the EU and the US on Chinese clean tech exports. You've been following this closely. You've been following the kind of process around EU countervailing duties in particular. For those who haven't been following it, can you talk us through the implications of this decision, most recently by the EU, and maybe also put it into the context of US tariffs and how they differ from each other?
Thank you. I mean, so actually starting with your final question, so the US now has a tariff on imported Chinese electric vehicles of cumulatively 102.5%. So there's the 100% tariff and then the existing 2.5% tariff. They also exempt Chinese electric vehicles from accessing the Inflation Reduction Act's consumer subsidies. All this basically means you can't buy Chinese EVs in the US, or if you do, you're talking very few cars. And I think it's important to realize that, and that was the case before the tariffs were up to 102.5%. They were largely performative. It was just signaling ahead of an election. They're putting tariffs on cars that weren't being imported. And the reason I'm sort of emphasizing that so heavily is that the EU's action is slightly different, insofar as the EU, after its official anti-subsidy investigation, is applying tariffs ranging between 17.4 and 38.1% on top of the existing 10% duty. That's not going to stop the EU importing electric vehicles from China. You sort of basically have to model this by going, okay, so what you can do, a 1% rise in cost leads to a what reduction in imports. And even if you apply quite a high multiplier, you're still importing Chinese electric vehicles at these sort of levels. So I've sort of done a back of the envelope calculation on the 21%, and a low sort of substitution rate means you've still got an increase, right? You're still importing quite a lot, and that is different. And I think it's important to understand that when we then think through, well, what's China's response? Because China can respond in lots of different ways. There's the sort of legal route, so it could start a WTO case. From an EU perspective, that's brilliant. That's how the system's supposed to work. You start a case, you run it through, maybe you have to make some modifications if you found that you did your sums incorrectly, or you have to tweak it slightly. Great. There's then the quasi-legal sort of response. China can start its own investigations, as it's done with French brandy and also Spanish pork, deliberately chosen because Spain and France were quite key supporters of the investigation. You've then got the sort of hostile end, whereas you lock up executives, you close down plants of other companies for sort of not particularly good reasons, and you start targeting even sectors that are completely unrelated but have some political salience. The US created a list of all the politically salient sectors in Europe when it was investigating the EU's proposed digital services tax. So, for example, Austrian grand pianos, Austrian microscopes, etc. So, I think there is a difference, and that difference matters insofar as my expectation is actually China's response to this investigation in the first instance. It will respond, there will be some retaliation, but I expect it to be relatively contained. There's a question as to whether that continues when you take into account all the other things the EU is doing. So it's got other tools it can use, the foreign subsidies regulation, which it's used to intervene in procurement bids by Chinese companies in the space of solar and trains, and it's also investigating Chinese presence in wind, and there's other tools out there. So for now, the response I think has been fairly contained, but that could change.
Thank you, Sam. Really helpful to kind of put that into context, and also not just in the context of what the US has done, but broader, what else is the EU bringing into this space, and how might that qualify kind of challenge?
And sorry, and it is just a relative proposition, right? If someone ups their tariffs, then it changes the sort of global equilibrium in a sense. So you then have just a sort of structural reaction where the EU's follow. Canada, as you mentioned, is now going to follow. That leaves in the G7 just the UK and Japan. Japan doesn't really buy electric vehicles. They don't like them that much, so it's not such a big deal. And if they do buy them, they tend not to be Chinese. So my expectation is UK
will follow suit.
Probably next.
Right. Thanks, Sam. And we're now going to pass over to Winnie Wen. Winnie is joining us online. She's Assistant Vice President of GCL System Integration Technology. She brings 15 years of expertise in the photovoltaic industry, specializing in strategic planning, operations, project management, and business development. She's been pivotal in driving not only GCL's, but also the solar industry's success more broadly, and her leadership also extends to the global stage as a board member of the Global Solar Council. So she's going to bring a manufacturer's perspective today on the impact of current trade and geopolitical tensions on the solar industry and how manufacturers are responding to these challenges. Winnie, thank you for joining us online. We've already heard from the other panelists a little bit about how the tensions are simply growing at the moment in this space. We're really keen to hear from you around what steps GCL is taking to navigate these trade measures in the EU.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon to you guys, and thanks for this chance that we can have here to talk a little bit about what is GCL and what is GCL's plan. I'm Winnie Wen from GCL Group, which is top low-carbon, green, renewable energy solution provider, origin from China, with branches and colleagues worldwide. Yes, the World Economic Forum in its latest report, Fostering Effective Energy Transition to 2024, finds that while the global energy transition is still progressing, it has lost momentum. A large reason for this is the geopolitical tensions, regulatory policy uncertainties, etc. A lot of the trade measures have appeared in the regulations and the policies around the ESG issues, implement of the technology like blockchain to enhance transparency and traceability in the supply chain, improving accountability and enabling quicker response. GCL is pioneering carbon data platform on this, which is launched during the snacking solar. We are utilizing the blockchain from Alibaba, provides from cradle to gate traceability, allowing GCL and partners to check the original journey and handling materials of the products in real time. Yes, for example, every batch of our FBR silicon or solar panels can be traced back to its source. ensuring all the components meet GCO and the EU's quality, sustainability standards, of course. The blockchain are tamper-proof, which can enhance compliance with the regulations and build trust between the partners and customers. It's quite easy. Scan the QR code on the module, you will get all the information about these products, including but not limited to the product's production flow, the raw materials, the vertical integrated supply chain, the carbon emission of each processing, and the ESG reports, and the verified partners engaged in the supply chain, and yes, also the information about the GCL, the producer. This will ensure a more stable, transparent, traceability, sustainable energy transition. And we are on the way to leading this. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Really interesting to hear the kind of measures you're taking specifically on supply chain transparency and as a means of kind of dealing with the current set of issues. I'm now going to pass over to Isabel. Isabel Hilton has spent nearly 2 decades promoting constructive dialogue with China on climate change. In 2006, she founded Climate China Dialogue, the world's first fully bilingual Chinese-English climate publishing platform. It's become the go-to website for information on Chinese policy and the go-to platform for Chinese readers to learn about global climate developments. Isabel's going to tell us about that despite the mounting tensions, we still need to find ways to cooperate on climate change with China. So we've talked a little bit about trends in China in terms of clean energy development, tensions between that and decarbonisation agendas and how other countries are reacting in the trade space. Can you tell us a bit about what the recent moves by the EU and the US suggest about China's role in global decarbonisation, but also how you are seeing current trade tensions spill over or not into climate cooperation discussions?
Yes, of course, and I'd also like to set this discussion in perhaps in the broader context of geopolitics, because I'm afraid we've all learned that the climate space is not immune from geopolitics. And in a sense, you know, what we're seeing now with Chinese transitional technologies, we saw 20 years ago when the Chinese entered into the manufacture of solar panels and wind turbines in a major way. We saw it with telecoms, with Huawei, where you had the similar kind of pattern of Chinese undercutting established Western industries. Its critics would say, of course, this was because of subsidy, and to a large extent, that certainly played a role. But I think one of the differences now is the shift in the geopolitics, and I would suggest that there are a number of factors which is making this rather trickier to handle. There's been a loss of trust between the major global players, and you know, globalization was premised on a degree of trust which has pretty much vanished. And we've seen the concomitant, as we've been hearing, the willingness of the EU to take a more robust line on trade practices. And this is an important shift in approach. It's tricky. If you look at, everyone has their 3 words on China, you know, confront, cooperate, you know, whatever it is. But 3 words are a description. They're not a policy, because the weight that is given to each of those 3 words in any policy decision is contested and variable. So particularly, I mean, the EU, much more than the United States, is kind of shifting from foot to foot, trying to balance a whole range of influences to this challenge. But the second important thing is compared to 20 years ago, the sophistication of the Chinese industrial sector. This is a real challenge, this focus on more advanced technologies. And that has top-level political backing. And we should also note that there's no meaningful separation really between, there is a civil-military fusion doctrine in China, which means there's no meaningful separation between advanced technologies for civil use and advanced technologies for military use. This has led to mounting concerns in the West, particularly since Ukraine, about dependency and about supply chain dependency. And these, again, are legitimate, not helped by Russia and, in some cases, China's willingness to weaponize those dependencies. So that is adding to the security question. And the fourth thing is we we're now talking about the motor industry, which is a kind of fundamental part of post-war German, industrial strength, and not only Germany. But if we are to maintain the legitimacy of the climate transition in European electorates and in, the electorates of liberal democracies, we have to recognize that we can't just wipe out or allow the major industrial sector to be wiped out and expect to maintain political backing. So it's a real problem. It's also true that this has resulted from strategic investment by China beginning in the 2010s, and as Michal said, it's not all about subsidies. China now has an industry which has integrated supply chains, which is very sophisticated, extremely efficient, in which it monopolizes the processing of strategic minerals and rare earths, and quite a lot of the supply. So, this is a very, very strong position. And it is a position which also contributes, as we know, on the upside. What we're seeing now is another round of another familiar cycle, which is that when a new industry emerges, every province wants one because it wants to kind of boost its own GDP. So every province subsidizes, every province wants its champion to win. This is followed quite shortly by an absolutely savage price war and a terrible triage of Chinese companies. We're seeing this in cars at the moment. There's an absolutely brutal price war going on inside China on those, which makes the hunger for export markets all the greater. So this is not something that is going to go away in China, and Europe, has to navigate this. I think that the trade measures are both legitimate and probably quite constructive. I mean, there are other things that we can do. And also there are markets beyond the EU and the US which are quite hungry for Chinese technology. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, we have seen 15 years of China exporting surplus capacity in high carbon goods and services to the detriment of the climate transition. There were many reasons for this. One was the synergy between the state-owned banks and the state-owned enterprises and the end of the construction boom and all of that, the model of development. But China is now at a transition point where it could and should replicate that pattern, but with low-carbon technologies. It's very, very well equipped in both its manufacturing capacity and its capacity to finance, to assist emerging economies to skip the high-carbon phase that we have until relatively recently thought was necessary. On the wider diplomatic picture, to your question about whether these tensions affect China as a diplomatic player in climate, I'm afraid they do. I mean, I think there was a heroic effort between Xie Jianhua and John Kerry after Trump was elected to try to isolate climate, to keep it as a kind of, because it was so important to everybody, to keep it away from the wider geopolitics. But it didn't really work. China, in any event, was doing its own version of derisking and has been since 2015. And there was a famous and ominous statement by the then Foreign Minister Wang Yi when he essentially said, look, you're talking about climate as an oasis in the desert, but in the end, oases get overwhelmed by sand. And that was pretty much saying, we are not going to let you carve out climate. We are going to, if you want cooperation on climate, then you need to make concessions on other things. So yes, it is, I'm afraid, affecting it.
Thank you, Isabel. That was really helpful putting it in the broader geopolitical context, but also what's happening within China in terms of internal competitive dynamics and then what this means for developing countries. Conscious of time and everyone is hungry and wants to get to lunch, so I'll just turn to the final question, which is we're asking each of you, this is very easy, huge question, but one sentence response. What should be the number one priority for policymakers, be it in Europe, the UK, the US, you can choose your geography, in balancing competitiveness and de-risking objectives while still maintaining momentum on climate action? And I'll start with Michal.
Thank you. I want to hijack sort of 30 seconds of my answer just to go back on some of the things, because you said this in your introduction, that China concentrates, and Isabel alluded to this, it's the upstream, it's the processing. So we cannot exclude China from these supply chains. To sort of say we can recreate supply chains and do it without China is nonsensical. Now, we need to diversify, and we need geographic diversification outside of China, which is what is happening through some of these trade measures. But there is also a geography of manufacturing that is evolving, with Chinese companies investing in other countries, be it in Morocco, that is a free trade agreement partner with the US and the EU. So, you know, there's a lot that's happening in response to these duties. But to think that we can do it without China is wrong. But we have to, I think, engage with China, and this is perhaps the one thing to do, because if we set up policies correctly, then it's not just about China selling equipment. There is technology transfer and learning that happens from Chinese investments. Just like Western companies 20 years ago were forced to transfer technologies in China, well, now the shoe's on the other foot. So let's learn. Let's learn from these processes. Let's learn from the leaders in manufacturing, and let's use that to the advantages either in the West or in emerging economies, or both. But let's use this.
Thank you, Michal. And we're getting a couple of signals that the EU is kind of going in that direction with this focus on kind of joint partnerships and kind of bring that tech transfer back to us now. Over to Sam.
So there's two answers to this question. Well, if you just want to address climate change really quickly, China is massively subsidizing production, so the West should massively subsidize consumption and deployment. Yeah. Right, that's my completely political insensitive. The politically sensitive answer is that every country has its own equilibrium as to how much of the production you need to capture in order to maintain popular support. And that will vary by geography. In the US, it seems to be nothing from China, or at least nothing in that camp or the like. The EU, somewhere in the middle. The UK will be different. Japan will be different. Canada will be different. Indonesia will be different. Turkey will be different. And it's just a case of finding that sweet spot where you can still deliver on your climate ambitions and the politics don't turn on you to the point of total disruption.
Thank you. And I guess adding to that layer of where can you compete in terms of what is politically resilient, because where are you actually going to get those manufacturing jobs or not, and how can you manage that?
Well, there might not be manufering jobs. There's a whole service. You know,
installation jobs or wider energy transition jobs.
I think it just completely depends on country by country.
Over to you, Winnie.
Hey guys, I totally agree with you guys what is mentioned now. I think a collaboration and innovation, that's the key. The biggest opportunity for collaboration lies in mutual communication, open discussion, talking. I strongly believe in that. By fully leveraging the strengths of both parties or countries, I think there is enough room for integration and learning from each other. There's a lot of connectivity between EU and China, with fruitful and essential for the energy transition. Incentivize innovation. This increases efficiency and encourages competitiveness, also while driving the advancement that can lower costs, have better efficiency, aiding to the climate action goals. Yes, China is quite strong in the PV production, there's no doubt, and now it's a very good economic scale, which is contributed to the better cost control and increase the deployment of the solar globally and worldwide. But also more and more Chinese companies, not like us, GCO, are doing real movements on the local capacity installation. For example, for us, the FBI to be under construction it's a capacity in the UAE. And also, some of my colleagues from the investment department is along with us just now. We are talking with some of the partners. We want to do the preparations to do the setting the downstream production capacity in EU locally. We work a lot on this kind of collaboration, which is much benefit for mutual parties, not for just for Chinese makers or just for EU. But I think it is good to utilize the strengths of each party and also the collaboration. For example, there are some demands in the EU, which is increasing the local capacity. And this is something actually not just that GCO is ongoing. I think a lot of the clean energy solution providers, they are also working on this. So we are moving step by step. But still, I think it's the collaboration and open for discussion. Don't shut down doors and just impose the tariff, making some this kind of positive and workable solutions together. Negotiation, collaboration is much, much important than this shutdown and impose the tariff.
Thank you, Winnie.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Sorry
joining
to
us.
be so shy. I just always trying to make myself not so.
Winnie's joining us from
blunt.
Spain. I'm going to pass over to Isabel. We are at time, but take a minute.
The most urgent thing. Okay. I completely agree with Michal. We need to learn from China. Get China to create jobs in Europe rather than destroy them. Setting up manufacturing, it's beginning. Secondly, stick to your guns on regulation in order to drive up standards in China. And thirdly, address the security problems with electric and connected vehicles. These are real. And again, we can learn from China. You know, connected vehicles collect huge amounts of data. We don't know where the data goes. They remain connected to their manufacturers because of software updates. And in a world of hybrid warfare and the capacity to weaponize in all sorts of ways, that is an absolute security risk. In China, this is recognized. If you're driving a Tesla, you're not allowed to drive it near a military base. You're not allowed to drive around town when Xi Jinping is visiting. And your data has to stay in China. So, hey, you know, if they can do it, surely we can reciprocate nicely.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being part of this session, and enjoy your lunch.